Thank you. So thank you everyone for attending. We are recording just for anybody that is not able to attend live. We're gonna probably send it out in a LibGuide and have it to send to instructors and students for future use. We're very grateful to have with us today Heather B. Moore. Her book is The Paper Daughters of Chinatown. We have it in our library as both an ebook and a hard copy. I think we have it too at multiple locations, so feel free to search for that if you haven't had a chance to.
Alexis, are you there, Alexis? Oh, I think she. Oh, are you able to hear me?
I can hear you. I think she might have to log back in.
Okay. Well, I'll carry on in her stead. So yes, again, thank you everyone for attending. We are recording this for the people who can attend, and this is Heather B. Moore is joining us. She has, okay, hold on a second. Looking for the little speech. Okay. Heather's book, The Paper Daughters of Chinatown, is a historical fiction novel that has been named one of the best new books by the American Library Association, and the Historical Novel Society called her book meticulously researched. The book takes place in San Francisco in the 1890s at the Occidental Home for Girls. The book highlights all of the impacts, conflicts, and the enduring effects of human trafficking from the view of those who were trafficked, those who were trying to help, and those who were part of the trafficking system. And with that, Heather, why don't you take it away?
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much. And hopefully Alexis will get back on soon. I know how it is sometimes when we don't have control over our Wi-Fi connections. So I was really excited to get this invitation. And I've actually gone to Arizona a lot. Every year I go to Arizona, but it's in the Mesa area where my brother lives for a writers conference. And so I would love to sometime stop by Tucson and see where all these beautiful places are in the state. So one thing I just wanted to spend the first few minutes just talking about the idea and the publication of the book and maybe a little bit of the research. And then I will go to PowerPoint and I will show you some photos from the real life people that we read about in this book. One of the questions I do get asked a lot is, why did you write this book? Or why did you decide to write about this topic? And we all know, for those of you who've read it, and I won't give any spoilers away, but one of the main topics of the book is human trafficking. And I say, honestly, I did not set out to write a book about human trafficking. I didn't have an agenda. I was looking for women in history that had made an impact on society and their communities around them. And so I was actually brainstorming with my editor and the production manager at the publishing house. And I had pitched 4 different ideas. And they took those ideas to committee, and kind of how it works is I'll write up kind of like just a blurb or summary. And then also we'll do a little bit of research, marketing research, say, this person, there's a couple nonfiction books about this person, but there's no novels out there because they want to make sure when they're presenting a product that it's not like 10 others out there. And so it does have to do with, they do need that foresight, not just writing the book and publishing the book, but then how will the readers receive it? And is it something that readers want to read or they would be interested in? So they came back to me after my pitches and they said that they were interested in this woman named Donaldina Cameron and have a historical novel written about her. So I, just like all of you, when you Google somebody, Wikipedia comes up first. And so I thought, oh, well, I'll just read a quick summary. So I just went online, I read a quick summary of her. I looked at a few other links. And basically I was reading a 2-paragraph summary of her life. I thought, oh, wow, she's amazing. This is a woman who you know, did a lot of good. She made a lot of changes. She fought for human rights, especially among the Chinese people. She was there every step of the way in the court system, battling for just for basic human rights that we all enjoy today. And little did I know that accepting the chance to write about this book, that I was going to start into a research path that would take me to very, very dark places, to very hard topics, hard situations. I still uncover things when I'm looking up something online. So I run a Facebook page for the book, and every day I'm posting something that has to do with what went on in Chinatown and San Francisco during that era. And I still am learning things. So it's not that you can write a book and be done with it forever. It's one of those books that just continue to kind of haunt me, and I continue to learn and continue to be inspired by it. So one thing that was interesting is the publisher contracted me to write this book. I agreed. I love to write a book about Donaldina Cameron, because whatever I was going to write about, I was still going to have to research. So to me, the research process was going to be the same. And so they contracted me. I signed that contract without having submitted one chapter to them. So that was very daunting to me. I've written a lot of historical fiction, so it wasn't really that I didn't think I could do it. It was, could I do it well enough that this publisher will then love the book, and then they will accept the book. And then the next step would be going through editing and all that kind of stuff. So I started the book in 2019. I actually had kind of a tight deadline because the contracts took a while to get finished. They had some turnover in the company. And so I didn't start writing the book until mid-April, and my deadline to turn it in was in August. So that is pretty quick. Even when you're a full-time writer, that is pretty quick, because I knew there was going to be a lot of research. So the first thing I did is I went on Amazon and I found all the books I could about her. And there were some books that were written when she was still alive, and there's some after the fact. And so I got all those books and I just started reading them and taking notes. And that's kind of how I can learn and process material, is if I read something straight through, and even if I use the book to highlight or underline, I don't know, it doesn't really compute as much as if I actually take notes. And so when I had literally 80 pages of typed notes, single space, I thought, and that was about 2 weeks of work. I thought, okay, I think I have enough research done to at least start the book, because I was starting to get anxious because now it's May. I'm like, I have like May, June, and half of July to have the first draft, because I needed 2 to 4 weeks. I don't know, just time to send this book to beta readers. They are either beta readers or alpha readers, which are readers that I select in advance to just read the draft, give me feedback. And then once I get that feedback, then I do revisions. And then once those revisions are done, then I send it to my agent and she gives me revisions. And then after that, then I will submit to the publisher. So I was really pushing a 2.5 month project. So what I did is I said, okay, I need to organize my word count. How many words do I need to get done 5 days a week? And knowing that, so say I was writing 2,000 words a day, I could theoretically do that in an hour if it was just flowing, or maybe 2 hours if I look at things. But it was realistically taking me 5 or 6 hours a day, because I wasn't making up this story. I mean, I've written historical fiction where the guidelines are a lot more loose, but this historical fiction, I really wanted to follow very closely as possible, Donaldina's experiences. And when I was probably about 3 chapters into the book, I realized I feel like I'm just writing an entertaining journal in a narrative style. And so I thought I really would like to bring in another character's point of view that is one of the girls that went through this experience, and one of the Chinese girls. And so I looked at all, and there's a lot I could have chosen from. I could have chosen from Tian Fuwu or Ah Cheng, and there's a lot. And I thought all of these stories would be interesting. And obviously I didn't have a lot on these. I had tidbits from my research, so I would still be embellishing a lot. And I thought, okay, I know a lot about Donaldina Cameron, so I'm not really embellishing her at all. But I felt like I didn't want to embellish a true women's experience that went through that kind of trauma. And I felt like maybe their stories can be told, but I didn't feel like I was the person to tell it. And so that's why I decided when I created Mei Lin, she's a composite character. And I felt like that just gave me more freedom to create a character that her experiences are based on true experiences, but I'm not going to down the road have her descendants read this book and maybe feel like, you know, their feet were stepped on, or feel like I went over the boundaries that I should have set. I just really wanted to respect the experiences of these Chinese women and what they went through. And so I have Donaldina Cameron is, if you read the story and if you maybe study the writing, the kind of the writing style is a little different with her, because it does read more like maybe more of a memoir type. Well, it's not first person, but more of a narrative type, a third person, where Mei Lin, I had a lot more freedom with her as far as getting into her thoughts and feelings and opinions and experiences. So both of the characters will read a little bit different if you're analyzing the writing. So anyway, so I did all that. I went through all the process, and I found that getting 2,000 words a day, I could get my word count goal finished by early afternoon. And I have kids at home, and the youngest though she's in high school now. So it was good for me. I could get that part done by the time she got home. But I also had another book I wanted to work on, which is kind of more of a lighthearted book. But I found that I couldn't work on that second book in the evenings because the research and writing the Paper Daughters of Chinatown, it just really was an emotional, I wouldn't say emotional toll, but it did pull a lot of those emotions out. There's a lot of stuff that I didn't include in the book, and I don't think needed to be included in the book, that is just things I'll never forget, things that are really heartbreaking. Another thing you might find interesting is I was writing for a publisher that doesn't publish things that are too graphic. And I've done that for a long time. I've written about wars and battles and assaults and terrible things, but I have to find a way to make it so that it maybe is not too triggering to the audience. And it can be appropriate for young adult readers, and it's not necessarily a young adult book, but this is the target market for my publisher. And so as you can see, where creative expression meets business marketing plan is you have to decide, do I want to write for this publisher? Because I will have to write inside their parameters or inside their box. And so I knew going in that this topic was going to be hard, and I was a little bit nervous that some of the scenes might have to be cut. And I was very impressed and very proud when I started working with the editor, and they didn't cut anything from the book. There's nothing graphic in there. I don't think I have curse words in there. I can't remember. Some of my books, some do, some don't. But I was pleased that they let some of those scenes stay. It's obvious what's going on, the abuse that's going on. It's not spelled out in modern English, but we see the emotional after effects with the character about what's going on. And I think for this book and for this topic that you can read the nonfiction sources, and you'll get a lot more details about some of the tragedies and terrible things that went on. And so I do I do have at the back of the book a suggested bibliography, and I have chapter notes. If you listen to the audio, you're not going to get that, but if you have the hardcover or ebook, then you'll be able to go back and see, oh, you know, the guy that was shot outside the mission home, that was based on a true story. In fact, you have Mei Lin, a lot of the things she went through are based on true stories. And the young man that she falls in love with, Huan Sun, his character is made up, but his experiences are also based on true stories. And I include the references in my chapter notes. So that's kind of interesting. And then, as I mentioned, on Facebook, I have a page just called The Paper Daughters of Chinatown. And every day I post a tidbit, whether it's a true story from the actual book events, or I'll post something else that I found. Like there's some talented artists that have put together artwork, and they've done videos on YouTube about her life. And so I'll post those. In fact, just recently, I think it was in May, an article came out, and I just found it through a Google search, of this young woman whose grandmother had lived at the mission home. And she wrote the story about her grandma, and it was really neat because she included a picture of her grandma as a little girl. So there's still a lot of gems out there to be found and discovered. So what I'll do is I will go to my screen share now and pull up my PowerPoint. And then, like was mentioned, for people that are just joining us, if you want to ask questions in chat after you get through the PowerPoint, we can take a few minutes to see if there's questions you have. So I think this is, okay, here we go. Okay, all right, so this is a picture of Donaldina Cameron, and I'm assuming she is in her late 20s and early 30s here. She arrived at the mission home in San Francisco in 1895. And one thing is, she was well dressed. She came from an affluent family, and she felt like once she arrived that maybe she was overdressed. And this is kind of interesting to see this picture of her all gussied up. And then you can see her clothing, very Victorian. And the mission home ladies, as you kind of read between the lines throughout the story, they had strong Victorian ideals. And so whether they were right or wrong, it's part of history. And I did not want to shy away from some things that could be controversial, and definitely are controversial today, or probably even the wrong way to do something. For example, at the mission home, so Donaldina was asked to teach a sewing class, and that was not just we're teaching you how to sew, so that was part of it, but also the mission home girls stayed really busy sewing. They sewed for charities, they sewed for the Red Cross, they sold things and they sold them in order to make some money. And so they're very industrious at the mission home. So Donaldina Cameron is teaching the sewing class, and there are also other classes, like they taught the girls English. They taught them to write and read Chinese, because a lot of these girls, they would speak Chinese, but they didn't know how to read and write. And they also taught them Bible classes. So the mission home was not ran by the Presbyterian Church, but it was funded by the Presbyterian Church. And so anytime you have a school or a place that is funded by church, then usually they ask that there's some sort of connection there. And so the girls, they were taught in Bible studies. This didn't necessarily mean that all these little girls converted to the Presbyterian Church, but they also had a Chinese room at the mission home, and it's still there today. And they had different donations of Chinese rugs and furniture and vases and artwork. So these girls could keep their culture close to them and continue to have that connection to their original homes. So Donaldina arrives, and she's 25 years old. She has been engaged once. Her engagement was broken. And I looked through the books that mention it, and none of them say why it was broken. But I think she was engaged when she was around 19 or 20. But if you think of the Victorian world, getting married is kind of the number one aspiration of a woman, well, not always from the woman, but the woman's family. And so women's rights were limited. Women didn't have the right to vote at this time. Career choices were very limited. So as we kind of go throughout Donaldina's story, she not only did she was she a pioneer in so many things that she did, is that she did it while she was living in a restrictive society toward women and toward herself. So this is obviously a later picture than 1895, but this is inside the mission home, and it's just showing all these women working and making things that they could either sell or donate to various charities and causes. So this is the original mission home, and this was built in the I'm sorry, I didn't look at it. I think it was like early 1880s. And what happened is so this is 920 Sacramento Street, and the mission home today is still in the same corner, exact same location. When these missionary organizations in San Francisco saw the need to reach out and provide a safe haven for these young girls that had been brought over and sold into brothels and really had no recourse. They had no way to escape, because then where would they go? So they wanted to provide a safe haven. And the Presbyterian Church wasn't the only one doing this. There is also, through my research, the Methodists, and I think there was one more church organization. So the ladies that organized the first board, they just rented some rooms at the top of a building. And the problem is once you get outside of Chinatown in San Francisco back then, there's a lot of anti-Chinese rhetoric going on. And so the landlady that they rented the rooms from, she kind of pushed back, and she didn't want the Chinese in her building. And so they made them go up the back stairs instead of the front stairs, so her neighbors wouldn't see these Chinese girls coming and going. So of course this told these mission home workers that we need our own building that we can control, and no one can tell us what we can and can't do. And so that's when the fundraising started, and they were able to raise enough funds to then build this large home, which is several stories high. And it also had a basement in it, which had an escape tunnel, which the new mission home included that as well. So, and I was going to wait to mention this at the end, but interesting thing enough is the mission home is still there in San Francisco. I went to see it last year. And it's now called the Cameron House, after Donaldina Cameron. And they are still a Chinese American community center. They have youth programs there. They have summer camps. They have just a lot of support, like counseling sessions and group therapies that go on. So it's an amazing place, and they still are serving the community there. So this is a picture from, I think, the 1930s. So this is farther ahead than what the story follows. But this is an actual group of, we call them either the Tong or high binders of slave owners. And this was an affluent group that they were running the sex trafficking in Chinatown. And all these people got convicted. Some of them got jailed. Some of them got extradited back to China. And it's called, if you want to look it up, it's really interesting. There's a blog post about this case. It's called the Broken Blossom case. And it goes through how these former Chinese slaves came in. They had to testify against certain men and women in this group. So sometimes you think of human trafficking as men preying on women, but it's also, women are also involved. Women can sometimes get in the doors easier and be just as manipulative, and it's a big money business. So you think, why? How could you let your soul stoop to such low depths? I think desperation and greed, we can't underrate them, that they can definitely feed into this. So here we have Margaret Culbertson, and she's the first superintendent we meet in the book, and she is working at the mission home as the director when Donaldina arrives. So we don't know exactly what Margaret Culbertson, what her health situation was, but when Donaldina gets there, she's experiencing health difficulties already. And I would have to look up in my notes to see how old she was at the time. But she literally worked day and night. And so I'm sure that took a big toll on her health, as well as the stress and the responsibilities, and sometimes living in fear. There were death threats against the home. In fact, the day that Donaldina Cameron arrived, that morning, they had found dynamite about the home. And one source said that it was just one stick of dynamite in one window well. Another source says that there were several circling the entire mission home. But the bottom line is that this was a threat that they had to deal with. And so when Donaldina arrived, I can imagine her just being bright-eyed and very excited. And she's 25 years old. She's had setbacks in life, but she wants to do something. She doesn't really have a vision for her future or the direction, but she said, yeah, I can go help at the mission home for a year. This will be, a great service project maybe. And of course that all changes. But there's recorded, well, not like video recorded, but there's the mission home records say that there's a conversation between Donaldina and Margaret about Margaret basically telling Donaldina, this is what happened this morning. This is not just, being a sewing teacher. There's so much more involved in this than you realize. And it was kind of a turning point for Donaldina. She didn't know what she was getting into long-term, but she still had to decide, am I really going to commit to this 1 year of serving these girls and young women, and which eventually included going on rescues. So this is another question that I get asked a lot, is if the Chinatown squad was real, and they were definitely real. This is a picture of the men, the real men that served. And I chose one of the men, Officer Cook, to kind of bring more personality and more life to, and he and Donaldina Cameron develop a great camaraderie and friendship over the years. So as you can see, they're holding axes and sledgehammers. And if you think, of course, you probably couldn't get away with this today, but if you think about the 1880s and 1890s, it really was kind of still a wild, wild west. And they didn't have all these laws in place. The Chinatown squad, they would knock on a door, and if it wasn't open, they would bust in or break in, and then they would go basically snatch the girl that they were there, who had sent a message to be rescued. In the book, you read about how Miss Culbertson would receive a note and a torn piece of cloth. Usually it was a red cloth, and she would then take that piece of cloth and she'd match it to whatever girl in the room or the building had the cloth that matched. And so that's how they knew it was the right person. And Miss Culbertson would also bring a Chinese interpreter. And I'm sure that Miss Culbertson knew some Chinese to get by, but when you're facing a young girl who is scared and fearful, it's probably a lot more comforting to have a native speaker speaking to you and explaining that we're here to help you, you'll be fine, come with us. These men with axes, they're our friends, because that might be a little bit terrifying too. Another thing that from my research is Miss Culbertson had told Donaldina, who was tall, I think she was around 5'8" or 5'9", and she had reddish hair, she had pale white skin, and her ancestry is from Scotland. And she says, you are going to stick out in Chinatown. This is just a fact. And if you get into this work, you can go these rescues, then you will also become a target of threats and possible death threats. So that's another thing that Donaldina had to come to terms with. And that's why she got this nickname, the White Devil. I think it was Fan Kuai was the interpretation of it. And she also got the reputation among these slave owners They would spread rumors about her. In fact, on the ships coming over to America, they would tell these girls, you know, you have to stay away from this woman. She will take you in her basement and she will poison you. And so they already had this built-in fear. But then these girls that were brave enough to reach out, you know, I guess they decided that facing that fear was better than the situation they were in. This is a picture of, this is staged. It was for a newspaper article, but that is Donaldina Cameron. And they're basically just demonstrating how they would go into alleys and they would bring these girls to safety. Of course, years down the road, everybody got lawyers and laws began to get passed. And so now Donaldina had to get a search warrant. So when she was notified about a rescue, she would immediately call the San Francisco Police Department and they would start getting that search warrant. So then they had to go through more legal channels, and then the slave owners got their lawyers too. So then as time went on, the battles were in the court. It wasn't just Donaldina and the Chinatown squad snatching a girl off the street and then locking their doors in the mission home. It eventually became, they had to then get not only the search warrant, but they had to then get guardianship papers so they could keep the girl in the mission home. And then obviously they'd go to court to battle it out. And not every court case was won. Sometimes the girls were asked to testify and they would just freeze up. They had so much fear when they had to face the slave owner that they wouldn't say anything. So then the judge would have no other recourse but then to send the girl back to her grandpa or uncle or whatever he was claiming to be. So this is a picture, and there's a couple that I found. So the general idea is that you go into an alley and they have the brothels. A lot of them are underground. Some of them were just visible from the alley, or there, you know, multiple rooms going up, like the first picture we saw. But this is a quote. It's a little hard to read as far as content. Herbert Asbury informs us that two types of brothels in San Francisco's Chinatown were the parlor house and the crib. The parlor houses were upscale and limited in number. They attracted wealthier patrons and were furnished in relative luxury. The women dressed in expensive and alluring clothing. Cribs littered the streets of Chinatown, sometimes lining both sides of an alley. The crib was meagerly furnished and consisted of a small one-story shack, some 12 feet wide and 14 feet deep, divided into two rooms by heavy curtains of coarse material. So you have a society, you have a Chinatown where this kind of stuff is not stopped or monitored. A lot of the government leaders in this area, they just didn't want anything to do with Chinatown. They just sort of just let them run their own lives, and we don't want anything to do with it. And so this actually, it wasn't until 1906 that there was a San Francisco earthquake, and it exposed all these underground opium dens and brothels that some of the government leaders would just pretend like it wasn't there. So now that these underground places are exposed and you can no longer deny it. So that was kind of a turning point too for the city as far as recognizing that there is a problem and we need to fix it. It needs to be cleaned up. These girls can't be treated like this. And then interestingly enough though, is that you would think, okay, well, San Francisco was almost completely destroyed, if not by earthquake, then by the fires in the next few days. But these human traffickers, these slave owners, they just took their business out to the cities outside, like San Rafael and Oakland. They just moved their business outward. And Donaldina actually ended up still going on rescues with her staff in the 2 years that they were gone from San Francisco, waiting for the mission home to be rebuilt. So this was found in 1898 at a Salvation Army in a coat pocket. And so obviously it's a retyped version of it, but it's a bill of sale. And this just shows how common and how just, I don't know. I mean, how can you be casual about this? But this is what happens. So if you see the third line, there's a girl that was sold for $250. Back then, of course, that was worth a lot more than it is today. So my research, I found that some of the girls, so they were first bought in China, taking advantage of parents that were either desperate for their daughter to have a better life, a wonderful life in America where she would have plenty of food to eat, plenty of money, or some of the, like for example, in the Tian, she's one of the main young ladies in the book. Her father had, I think it was gambling debts, so he sold her to pay those. So these girls are bought for maybe $250 up to $400 in China, and then they're brought to San Francisco where they're sold for a lot more. Some of them up to $1,000 and some of them even higher. And then these girls are then under contract, and then they now have to earn back their contract before they earn their freedom, which rarely happened because a lot of these girls, like so I should have included a sample contract in here, but it basically is saying that if you take a day off, you still have to make up that day. If you're sick or something's happened, or even if they went through a pregnancy, they get docked on their contract. And so it becomes very, very difficult for them to actually earn back that money. And some of these more beautiful women were sold for maybe $3,000 to $5,000, and then they were forced to earn that back. So as you can see, that this was back in the early 1900s. This was a big money business. So here we have an example of a young woman, and if you look at the bottom, her feet, they look very small and narrow. So she has bound feet. And bound feet is a tradition that was outlawed in the 1800s. But this relates to the story because some of these girls that came over from China, if they had bound feet, they wanted them to unbind them. So they would soak them in salt water, and for a couple of weeks, like they do all these ministrations. That way they could be a domestic servant. They could haul water, they can care for children, and they can go outside and do errands. So I'll just read this quote really quick. So my grandmother, mother, and an aunt all had bound feet, and it was so painful for them to get around. When they got up in the morning, I had to go fetch the water for them to wash up and carry the night soil buckets out. Every morning we had to draw water from the well for cooking, for tea, and for washing. I would help grandmother with the cooking, and until I became older, I was the one who went to the village marketplace every day to shop. So if you had bound feet, it was very painful to walk. So the idea was that you were more of an ornament in the home. You would have your husband's babies in the home, but you couldn't really go and do chores. And this became a status symbol for the men that were wealthier, because if their wife had bound feet, it just kind of showed that they're able to pay for more people in the household, and the woman wasn't able to do any chores. So thankfully, if you can obviously look up bound feet and what they look like and how they do it is very painful, and it makes me not complain about anything that's wrong with my feet. So these women endured a lot, and I'm grateful that this was put to a stop. But some of these girls that ended up at the mission home, they had gone through maybe a bound foot procedure, and so they're also dealing with that type of healing too. So when I was at the mission home last year, we went downstairs in the basement, and the tunnel is still there. And this is where they would bring in girls from off the street. So sometimes they would have a rescue, and they have the police protection all the way back to the mission home. But maybe the slave owner or some of his buddies would be kind of lurking around the street, waiting for an opportunity to steal the girl back. So they'd use this tunnel to go in and out if they needed to. It is also a place for the girls to hide. And this is because some of these girls are superstitious about basements. And the superstition was that there were demons in the basement. And so the slave owners had these superstitions as well. So you would think that if you were searching for someone at a big house, You went through all the rooms upstairs, all the rooms on the main floor. Would you not go look in the basement? I mean, to me, it just seems common sense, but they were afraid to go in the basement. And so the girls were afraid to be hiding there, but that was a better choice than being taken back to their slave owner. And the reason why a slave owner could show up at the mission home and even demand to go inside is because they would go to the police and say, the mission home has a girl, has my niece or granddaughter, and she stole jewelry. So now there's a warrant for her arrest. So the slave owner comes to the mission home door with the policeman, and they're able to search the house and find the girl so that she can be arrested and go to court for stealing. Anyway, so this is interesting to see that is still there. So this is a photo of the double doors at the mission home, which are the original ones they were able to save from the fire. And as you can see, there are indents from the deadbolts, and there are 6 or 7 deadbolts on the door. And this gave Donaldina more time to open the door and let the girls go hide. So if you can imagine that she was just slowly turning each deadbolt and getting those girls, and the girls that knew they were probably being searched for extra time to get down to the basement. So this is Tian Fuwu, and at the beginning of the book, she is around 10 years old. Her story is interesting because she was one of the girls that did not apply for rescue. She was too young, but the police, I think it was Officer Cook. I have a quote in my book. I'm 90% sure it was him. He patrolling the streets, he saw this little girl and he could see the signs of abuse on her. And I think he tried to ask her if the woman that was, always around her, if that was her mother. I think there was a conversation, but basically he deducted from that this is a girl that was a domestic slave, which she was. And so he literally one day, he just came and carried her off to the mission home. And of course, that wouldn't have been able to happen a few years after that because of the laws put into place. But this is a quote by her, and it's really cute. When I read her quotes, I don't know, I just feel so endeared to her and her strength in her life. My owner used to make me carry a big fat baby on my back and make me wash his diapers. And to wash, you have to stoop over, and then he pulls you back and cry and cry. Oh, I got desperate. I didn't care what happened to me. I just pinched his cheek, his seat, just gave it to him. Then, of course, I got it back. She, his mother, went and burned a red hot tongue and burnt me on the arm. So when Donaldina first meets Tian, she does notice that she has the burn marks. And I think this is very sobering for Donaldina to see this evidence of physical abuse that some of these young girls and women had gone through. Tian did not trust adults. Of course, we don't blame her. It took a long time for her to warm up to Donaldina, even when Donaldina became the director. And it seems like, just from my reading, of course, I haven't met her, but it seems like her personality is just that she's a survivor. And even when she was in a situation at the mission home where she had 3 meals a day, she never went hungry, she had a clean bed, she was still in survival mode. There's a scene in the book that's based on a true story of her hoarding apples that were donated to the mission home. And I think it was just her survival instincts of, if I keep these apples, then I'm not going to be hungry tomorrow, even though we think, oh, well, you're still at the mission home, you're not going to be hungry tomorrow. But she had been in this survival mode for so long. And her story really is probably my favorite out of all the young women that I researched, because even though she had gone through so much trauma, she became one of the fiercest and most loyal advocates of the mission home work. And she ended up spending the rest of her career working at the mission home as well. So here's a picture. Of course, it's when they're older. This is Tian with Donaldina. And you can just tell that she's kind of sassy. Should be fun to meet. So true to her promise, Tian returned to the mission home after 6 years of education in Pennsylvania and Canada. I think I have a word missing there. But so she wanted to get an education, and she was sponsored by somebody who was a supporter of the mission home to pay for her. And she had told Donaldina Cameron, I'm going to get educated so that I can help you fight these battles. And Donaldina probably thought, I'm so glad you're going to be educated, but you don't need to promise to come back if you don't want to. There's a whole world out there that's open with opportunities. But Tien came back. She had no problem jumping right into service and shared in Donaldina's burdens. In 1916, she went to China to fill her lifelong dream of finding the family she'd been abducted from, but she never did find them. Tien worked faithfully at Donaldina's side, and when Tien retired in 1952, she moved into a cottage across from Donaldina's house. On January 4th, 1968, Donaldina took her last breath after being in the hospital for a few months. Her daughter, dear Tien, was at her side. So Donaldina Cameron, she had multiple opportunities to get married. As if you remember the book, she had a relationship with a man named Charles. And that whole part is based on their true relationship. And she decided that she was content at the mission home, and that these young girls, they really were her daughters, that they were her family to her. And I guess in the Victorian mindset that she probably wouldn't be able to be the full-time superintendent if she did marry in this era. So she made that very difficult choice. And then down the road, she was engaged again, and he tragically passed away. But I think she probably would have married the third guy. He seemed to be pretty avant-garde and supportive of her work and very proud of her. So not only do we have all these underground rescues and death threats going on, and times when their very lives were put in danger, both Donaldina and her staff members, as well as these Chinese girls. We also had Chinatown was quarantined, and this was the early 1900s with the bubonic plague. And this came over from, I think they had traced it to Hawaii at the time. And so this presented another problem, is trying to go in and rescue some of these girls that sent messages for help. There's a scene in there about Donaldina basically sneaking into Chinatown, and that's based on a true event as well. She obviously knew a lot of people, and she's able to go into one shop that had a skylight, and then she would go across the roofs until she got to the neighborhood she needed to be in. Another part of Donaldina's job, sometimes probably daily or at least weekly, is she knew the immigration agents very well. And if they were suspicious or questioning young women's papers, or even sometimes the boys or young men, she would go with her interpreter, and they would talk to the young girl and find out if they could see if the truth was being told. And there's a story in the book about a young woman who was adamant that what she was saying was the truth, and Donaldina left the immigration station, and months later she was called on a rescue to help this girl. And these girls, their lives were threatened. They were put in these difficult situations. They had nowhere to turn to, nowhere to go. They didn't know the language of the country they had arrived in, and they were starved. They were starving. And these highbinders or tongue members, they would start plying them with opium or other drugs and make them dependent, so then they were easier controlled. So now we're in 1906, a beautiful April morning, and this devastating earthquake rocked the entire town of San Francisco. The mission home actually was not damaged. I think it was just the chimney that had some damage to it. So theoretically, they could have stayed there fine, but then it was the fires that came. And this is when they started having mandatory evacuations. And so if you put yourself in Donaldina's shoes, you have, I can't remember the exact number, like 40 30, 40, sometimes up to 50 or 60 girls at this mission home at the same time. And now, what are all the police force doing? They're probably roping off neighborhoods and trying to keep things, you know, civil unrest from happening. And so Donaldina does not have the help that she normally has. It's just her and her staff members and all of these women together. And we know that the slave owners, they might come back and try to get their girls now that there's no cops around. And so they had to find another place to live. And so that's when they went across the bay. And they moved a couple different times in other cities, but interesting enough, I was actually looking this up the other day, is that Donaldina aided in 60 more rescues when she was away from San Francisco. This is just another picture of showing the approaching fires and how devastating it was going to be. Oh, the other interesting thing is that the city of San Francisco felt like Chinatown was dispensable. And so they set it on fire to create a fire break so that the fires wouldn't come up to the more wealthy neighborhoods. And of course that backfired, no pun intended. This is just a picture from their San Rafael home. You know, you can see all the way up from women, they're probably in their early 20s, down to young children. And so you can see the impact that this human trafficking had on all ages. This is a later picture of Donaldina Cameron and some of her staff members at the mission home. It just really humbles me. This whole story has of the sacrifice these women made, especially in a time when they didn't necessarily have their own rights either. And one thing that I was impressed with Donaldina Cameron is when I first read about her, you have the bird's eye view of her life. You think, oh, wow, she did all these amazing things. And we just read about all the wonderful ways that she served and she fought. But we don't always see or know about her day-to-day struggles. It seems like every time she took one step forward, she was then forced 3 steps back. And I think I related this to my own life, and maybe we can relate this to our own lives, is when we have a passion or a goal in mind, we're really excited to do something, we feel really strongly about it, but then the road there zigzags like crazy. It's not straight. Doors don't always open. Sometimes we have to go with our plan B or C or plan D, and something takes us longer or something's harder or it's more expensive. And I just want you to know, Donaldina experienced all of this. She actually fought depression and anxiety. I think I have one scene in the book where she goes for a weekend visit to her sister's home. She did quite a few of those, not every month, but there's times where she would take off a few days or a week because she just, you know, had traumas, you know, really hard things to deal with. And that time when she spent away a year, she went to Europe to meet her sister for the first time. And she also went to China and visited China. That was really a blessing for her to have that distance, but it was also hard on her emotionally because she missed her daughters. Not only did Donaldina work at the mission home and serve night and day and fight night and day, she also founded a couple different homes. She felt very strongly that the younger children needed a yard to play in. They needed to kind of live in a more happy atmosphere. If you can imagine working and living in a home where there are some people in there that have been through serious traumas, even a wedding. So you'd have some of these girls would get married and it was the most joyous day for that young woman, but it could be a horrible, tragic day for someone else that they had hopes for marriage to, and it didn't happen, or they're betrayed and they're sold into a brothel. And so there's a lot of emotions that went through in the mission home, and Donaldina just wanted the younger children to have more of a carefree, burden-free upbringing. And so she founded the Ming Kong Home for Chinese Girls, and it was built in 1925. And she served as superintendent there. And then she also spearheaded the Changmei Home that was for the homeless orphan Chinese boys. And this home was moved a couple times. It was first in an old wooden building, but then they eventually found a larger home to house it in. This is the mission home today. And as you can see, it's a large building. This was completed in 1908, so 2 years after the first one had burned down. They had saved that. You can see the stonework that says Occidental Board Presbyterian Mission Home. So that's the original name, but it is called Cameron House now. And then the front doors are the same doors, and they're double doors. And also, if you had even a closer picture of this, you can see the dark bricks that protrude, and they're kind of mottled and twisted. Those are from the original mission home, and they're the burned bricks that they saved from the original mission home. And so they implemented that into the new mission home. So when I got to tour this, it was really neat because we went all the way into the basement, saw the tunnel. We went through all the different rooms, and they still have the Chinese room there. They have the big dining room there that has the original table and it has a little plaque on it, and it says that's where Donaldina would sit there and do a lot of her work. And then you have the upper rooms and the corner where it was Donaldina's private bedroom. It's a very small room, and they say the closet, you can only fit, I think it was 2 pairs of shoes going across the closet. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity I'll stop the share here, to talk more about the book writing process, as well as some of the behind the scenes and sharing these images. I do have a Pinterest page about this, and also that Facebook page. So anytime I find a picture, I upload it there, because I think for me personally, the historical aspect is the most fascinating part of this. So if you want, I can see if there's any questions, or let's see. Okay, so there's a question from Joanne. I'd like to know more about the decision to let Chinatown burn after the earthquake and the resulting fire. That's like a good question, because I think honestly, just some of the sentiment toward Chinatown, and knowing that the fires are getting so close to Chinatown, is they just thought, if we can create a fire break, because I think they felt like Chinatown was already going to be burned, but they felt like if they could do a controlled fire and create a fire break, then that would save the higher neighborhoods. And that's something I haven't researched in detail, as far as going into maybe some of the archives file and see if I can find the executive order to do that. That actually might be something fun for me to add to my Facebook page when I find that research. But I think it was probably a hard decision, but it was also a devastating decision. In fact, in Hawaii, when they had the bubonic plague there, in the village that they had in, they tried to burn out the plague, because they thought if we burn this section of the village, then it'll just kill all the germs. Well, when they started the fires, obviously, they evacuated everybody, but when they started the fires, all the rats ran away, which was who were carrying the bubonic plague for the rats. So, the thing about our world today is we have a lot more modern knowledge and modern science. And so that's why I'm hoping our current pandemic, we were talking about this a little bit before the presentation, that with our resources and our modern knowledge, that we can find what the true solutions are to these situations. Okay, let me see if there's anyone else. Yes, Michelle says, thank you. Graciously, I can see the emotional impact your research has had on you. Yeah, I think part of that is, obviously, human trafficking is a horrible, vile situation. And I look back and I think it's still in our societies. Despite all the work that Donaldina Cameron and her mission home staff that Tianfu Wu did, is still prevalent. But I also look at them and I think they had found their passion, they had worked hard, they did make a difference. And it's really all any of us can do in our lives is put that step forward every day and keep pushing and just keep making the small differences where we can. Oh yeah, so this is really good from Dan. Traditional Chinese naming has the family name first and the given name second. Did you think about whether to westernize names or not? So I didn't say this in the beginning, but so 2 of my beta readers were Chinese Americans, and because I wanted to make sure those kinds of questions were dealt with. And so I was really debating on Tian Fuwu, how should I address her in the book? And so when I was at the mission home in San Francisco, I asked them, how was she addressed? And they said at the mission home, the staff members called her Tian, and the younger girls called her Auntie Tian or Auntie Wu. And so then I decided it depends on the scene. Most of the scenes, she's either Tian, depending on what point of view we're in, or I just use her full name. That way I was staying more true to how she was addressed in the mission home. But yeah, you're right. That was definitely a concern I took into, into my heart. So, and then Diane, sorry, can you talk a little bit about the research you did or continue to do? You mentioned starting with nonfiction books. Did you also look into public records or other primary sources? What's the source for all the great photos? Okay, so yeah, so definitely I got those nonfiction books. One of them was written by Mildred Martin, and there's one by Carol Green Wilson, and the one by Carol Wilson, she actually interviewed Donaldina Cameron. So the book was written during her lifetime, and I have a picture of the 2 of them together. And but yeah, so the mission home, they have records as well that I accessed. They have all their ledgers and the San Francisco, what is it called? Anyway, so, the Library of Congress. So that was also another resource for me. And the nice thing is that if I was researching a source and then I thought, oh, okay, I really want to know the original source, and it would reference another book that is now out of print, I could still find that through the Library of Congress, or I could find it through Google Books. And those books, they're electronic. You can't actually buy them, but you can go through and read them. In fact, I found the mission home reports are all through Google Books, and the Presbyterian Church had a journal I think it was either weekly or monthly, a journal they would send out. And so I was able to find out at the time, what was the Presbyterian Journal saying about Donaldina Cameron's mission home. So that was a great resource too. So has the community of Chinatown reached out to you? Not like in an official manner, but I've had several readers reach out to me and share their thoughts. Some of them, I would say most of them love the books. Some of them have some criticisms of the books, and it's fine. We've talked through some of those. Also, the narrator, Nancy Wu, she's Chinese American, and she did a beautiful job on the audio. I am still in contact with the Cameron House, and we've just kind of more email contact. I've sent them copies of the book, and so that's been really neat as well. And Lewis, has the book been picked up for a movie? No. No, I don't. I mean, that's definitely not my goal, but I think this story though, I think it has touched people's hearts. And so I'd love it to be in a bigger medium, but I'm fine with the book. I'm just a book geek, a book nerd. And sometimes when a movie gets made, I get all up and I'm like, wait a minute, this is not like the book that I loved. But obviously I don't think anything could go wrong with Donaldina Cameron's story. My book covers the first 13 years of her work. And so I think, I don't know if a movie would follow the same timeline or just take out a smaller slice or maybe expand it more. But this story literally could have more than one volume in it. But that's just kind of the publishing business, is that they just want the story to be focused on a certain number of years. So it becomes more of a cohesive story instead of a memoir that is maybe covering someone's entire lifetime. But if you do have a chance to look at the book, there's a bibliography which has some great books that are included there that will give you more information. One of the, in fact, I have it right here. One of the books I used a lot is just fantastically researched. It's called Unbound Feet. And it does have some information in here on downloading a camera, but it really just has a big overview of the history of the Chinese women in San Francisco. So to me, that was a gold mine. And even though it's a thick and dense nonfiction source, like every paragraph is fascinating and eye-opening. So it's really well written and really well done. Okay, any more questions? I think that's the end of the ones I can see. So thank you so much, everyone. And I'm happy if you do read the book and you want to reach out to me. I'm pretty easy to find online. I have a website, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, Pinterest. So reach out to me, let me know your thoughts. I'm happy to hear from anybody, and I'm grateful for Alexis and Lewis and their invitation to have me today. So thank you.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. It's great. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for attending. We'll be following up with an email to you all. So thanks again, and thank you to Heather.